De-interlacing. The person on the left did not think about the important processing technique prior to the production of our small film, as he only learned quite late of his participation in this production. And even later, when he had been offered the part and had accepted it, it was never mentioned that he would have anything to do with image processing. From the very beginning, it was clear that someone else would have to be responsible for smoothing out the image material. In order to make the movement of the ball look super smooth, 3 programs had to be downloaded from the internet, and the steps prescribed by the manual had to be followed. You do not want the lips of the person on the left to tremble or spring open and shut. After all, this was not supposed to turn into a comic film. Interlacing is necessary because 50 full frames per second, never mind. The technology has not yet been developed sufficiently. It was out of the question to wait until computers could handle the problem, because who knows what might have happened to the people who made the film by that time. So no other option remained other than occupying oneself with de-interlacing. The whole thing was supposed to look super smooth. When the person on the left had accepted the part, he first went home and ate something. He also drank something. If he had not come back in time, another person would have had to fill in, and again there would have been delays, a nuisance, explaining once more, waiting yet again. Possibly the people who made the film might have lost interest and cancelled the whole thing. And later some other people would have managed to use the new technology to make that film super smooth, or some other film. So, all this should be kept in the back of one's mind when watching the film. The film deals with a story by the title of Refutation of Quantum Theory. Refutation of Quantum Theory. So here I'm sitting on the wall, drunk, about 1 meter above the ground. I tilt forward as you would expect of a bum and fall onto the sidewalk like a sack of potatoes. I hit the ground with my face and suffer severe injuries that do not hurt because of my intoxication. I am unconscious, and after some time someone bends over me and calls the ambulance. Things get interesting in the hospital because I meet a sick woman who falls so madly in love with me that it seems as though all this shit has been worth it. She has gray eyes and a crooked mouth, and she's incredibly beautiful, but what is even more important is the fact that she understands the subject matter as profoundly as I do. The question is whether her eyes were already as big at the age of 2 as they are now. Anyway, she began getting interested in the details in those days. In other words, she got started on quantum mechanics. But that is not the unusual bit. She just looked at her mother and her teddy bear, and off she went, 1, 2, as these things do with all people. Her exceptional talent was only noticed 14 years later in her mathematics class, when she grasped the idea of the singularity of a function more quickly than anyone else, and remarked that a naive approach would result in the slope of the graph becoming fatally steep, saying that she made a whooshing sound as though a rocket was flying through the room. When she sensed that she could do something in this direction in the future, her eyes turned gray and her mouth crooked, and she became damn beautiful. She studied like mad, sat on her bed without sleep, and thought about the subject matter so ruthlessly that finally the outcome had to be precisely what people are so terribly afraid of, namely that if you look a bit more closely, quantum mechanics cannot work. She almost succeeded in coping with her discovery, but not quite, because it was shortly before her ovulation, and she was emotionally unstable and leaned to the right to reach for the drawer of the bedside table that contained the pills. She took 3 or 4, the details don't matter. In any case, her head is resting on my shoulder now, and she is humming the song that is perpetually playing on the radio, sitting outside in the hall, which one must pass on the way to the bathroom. If you were not in love, the incessant music could drive you crazy. Her humming does not, however, mean that we have changed the subject. On the contrary, it is still all about continuity on the one hand, and about the ridiculous leaps from 1 to 2, from 3 to 4, and so forth on the other. If those fellows from the Nobel Prize Committee weren't so arrogant and uptight, they would come here, sit down with us on the edge of the bed, and try to follow our talk about important matters. It would be worth it, I swear. Right now, for instance, my girlfriend is using a practical demonstration to prove that, in principle, separation can never occur. For this purpose, she starts lifting her hand from my arm so slowly that practically nothing changes. In spite of her disease, she has retained her sensationally fine motor skills, and the people from the Nobel Prize Committee would have to use the most sensitive equipment to be able to measure any change at all. But let's assume those fellows do have such equipment. Observe the display furtively, glance at her crooked mouth, think some kind of nonsense, stare at the display again, get themselves something to eat, chew, smack their lips, nod with arrogant smiles, and let their brains tick on in the background. What really is important to them, however, is keeping their distance from my mouth, because they are afraid of contracting tuberculosis. When they finally terminate the measurement with a slap on their thighs, my girlfriend's sudden and annoying demand to look a bit more closely comes as a surprise to them, which they first respond to by saying goodbye due to their acute lack of time, but then, however, stop at the door and turn back. They don't want to be impolite, they say, and again unpack their equipment with undiminished arrogance to show us once and for all the ridiculousness of our ideas. My girlfriend and I know that they will fight tooth and nail now, that they will torture their instruments, that they are desperate to reach a precision of measurement which can provide proof that two bodies are separate entities. It is all about finding evidence of the border between my girlfriend's and my bodies. It will take more time now. They don't set aside their arrogance, but they approach their task more seriously this time, and the measurements start. They check the results on the first scale, go deeper, measure on the second scale, check the results and go deeper again. They discuss things in a whisper, but it is clear they are talking about my and my girlfriend's skin as two separate layers. They fall increasingly silent though as problems start emerging. The instruments have not reached their limits yet, but readjustment causes difficulties. At the subatomic scale, problems start getting out of hand, and the embarrassing things occur. Their croaking and belching betrays their efforts to distinguish small things and to assign them separately to our bodies. We can sense it. They are already working in the hope that we might give up because of the miserable state of our health and fill the time remaining to us with other things than the question of continuity, with amorous glances perhaps, and romantic babble. They fail miserably. Their effort turns into a joke. Although this was clear to us from the beginning, we feel satisfaction. My girlfriend's wonderful grey eyes remain coolly fixed on their hands, which by now are merely scribbling columns of fictitious data on slips of paper. My face is hurting terribly, as the medical care for drunk and homeless people like myself is alarmingly poor in this hospital, and in fact borders on criminal assault. I do not even consider capitulation. However, after all, we have never been so close to the prestigious prize, and when we receive that large amount of money for providing proof of the continuity of transition of one body into another, and hence discovering the refutation of quantum theory, we can use that sum to decisively speed up the process of our recovery.